As a wildlife rehabilitator, she thought she'd seen it all, until the chaos began. Socks vanished, then reappeared in secret piles beneath the furniture. Cardboard boxes, no matter how small, became occupied fortresses. Her couch became occupied territory. Even her yoga mat turned into a battlefield. They call him Trouble, a 25-pound bobcat who's claimed every inch of her home as his kingdom. What started as a peaceful mountain life turned into something much wilder, unpredictable, and unforgettable. Whatever you think you know about bobcats, Trouble is about to rewrite it. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The rain came down in silver sheets that morning, turning the gravel road to Caroline's small cabin into a muddy stream. It was the kind of relentless spring downpour that kept the world quiet, tucked inside with a book and a warm cup of tea. For Caroline, a wildlife rehabilitator whose life ran on the quiet rhythms of nature, it was a peaceful day. The phone's sudden, shrill ring was a jolt, a sound that almost always meant an animal was in trouble. She wiped her hands on her jeans and answered, her voice calm. "Blue Ridge Wildlife Rescue, this is Caroline." The voice on the other end was rough, weathered by years of working the land. "Ma'am, my name is Jebediah. I own the farm a few miles down past Miller's Creek. I found something." Caroline's posture straightened. "What did you find, Jebediah?" "A kitten. A bobcat kitten, I think. He's just a little fella, no bigger than my hand, really. Found him by the side of the road, soaked to the bone and shivering something fierce. I waited a good hour, but there's no sign of his mama. With this storm, I don't think he'll make it much longer." Caroline's heart squeezed. A lone kitten in a storm was a death sentence. "I'm on my way. Keep him warm if you can, but don't try to feed him anything. I'll be there in 20 minutes." True to her word, she pulled her old pickup truck into the farmer's muddy driveway 19 minutes later. Jebediah, a kind-faced man with deep lines etched around his eyes, met her on the porch, holding a small cardboard box lined with an old towel. Inside, a tiny ball of spotted fur trembled violently. His eyes, a startling shade of blue that would later fade to gold, were wide with terror. He was so small, his ears just tufted nubs, his paws comically oversized for his body. He let out a weak, sputtering hiss that was more heartbreaking than threatening. "Poor little guy," Caroline whispered, her trained eyes assessing him. He was dangerously cold and dehydrated, but he was alive. "You did the right thing calling me, Jebediah." Back in her cabin, the quiet sanctuary she had built for herself was about to be turned upside down. She set up a warm enclosure, administered subcutaneous fluids, and gently warmed the kitten with heating pads. She named him Trouble, a hopeful nod to the mischievous spirit she prayed he would one day be strong enough to show. For days, he was a fragile, silent creature, taking formula from a bottle with a reluctance that worried her. He was a ghost in her house, a tiny wild thing suspended between two worlds. Caroline's home was a testament to her personality, orderly, peaceful, and minimalistic. Everything had its place. A tidy stack of books on the nightstand, a neat row of mugs in the kitchen, and a laundry basket where socks always, without fail, found their partners. At least they used to. About 3 weeks after Trouble's arrival, once he'd gained enough strength to wobble around on his big paws, strange things began to happen. Caroline would fold a load of laundry, certain she had a matching pair of wool hiking socks, only to find one was missing. She'd blame the dryer, her own forgetfulness. Then another sock vanished. A single argyle dress sock her father had given her for Christmas. Then a fluffy slipper sock. She started to think she was losing her mind, her once organized life unraveling one sock at a time. The mystery was solved one afternoon when she was searching for a misplaced TV remote. On her hands and knees, she peered under the worn floral couch and saw it. A dragon's hoard of lost treasures. There, nestled in a dusty kingdom of forgotten pennies and dog-eared paperbacks, was every single missing sock. They were arranged in a sort of nest, a chaotic pile of cotton, wool, and fleece. And curled in the middle, fast asleep with one of her favorite fuzzy socks tucked under his chin, was Trouble. She couldn't even be angry. She just stared, a slow smile spreading across her face. He had been meticulously hunting them, dragging them one by one to his secret lair. From that day on, she surrendered. Her socks were no longer her own. They were community property. Trouble would stalk a sock left on the floor with the intensity of a seasoned predator. He'd crouch low, his tiny body wiggling, before launching a ferocious attack, bunny-kicking it into submission, and then trotting off proudly with his prize. Years melted away. The tiny, trembling kitten grew, his body filling out with lean muscle, his coat turning a handsome tawny gold dappled with dark spots. He was a magnificent 25-pound adult bobcat, a creature of breathtaking wild beauty. And yet, his lifelong obsession remained. He never outgrew his love for socks. Instead of hiding them, he now presented them as gifts. Caroline would be reading on the couch, and Trouble would leap up beside her, a sock dangling from his mouth, and drop the slightly damp trophy in her lap with a rumbling purr that vibrated through the cushions. It was his way of providing for her, a wild instinct filtered through a quirky domestic lens. Trouble's second great love was cardboard. The obsession began with the first Amazon package he ever encountered. Caroline had left the empty box by the door, intending to take it out for recycling. When she turned around, two pointed, tufted ears were poking over the top. She peeked inside to find Trouble curled into a perfect circle, his eyes glowing in the dim cardboard fortress. He looked utterly content, a tiny king on his throne. From then on, every box that entered the house was immediately requisitioned. Small boxes, big boxes, long boxes, square boxes. It didn't matter. He would pour himself into any container, no matter how absurdly small. As he grew from a kitten into a formidable adult, the sight became a source of endless comedy. Guests, who were few and carefully chosen, would stop dead in the doorway, staring at the sight of a full-grown bobcat attempting to squeeze his majestic muscular frame into a shoebox. His enormous paws, tipped with formidable claws, would spill over the sides. His tail would stick out at an awkward angle, but his face would hold an expression of pure, smug satisfaction. "If I fits, I sits." His posture seemed to declare to the world. He was a wild predator, a creature of the deep woods, lounging in a prime delivery box as if it were a custom-made den. But if the days were filled with quirky, heartwarming scenes, the nights were another story entirely. Nights were for chaos. Caroline quickly learned that the term catnap did not apply to a nocturnal predator. Trouble's internal clock was set to the moon, and when it rose, his energy levels skyrocketed. Her peaceful cabin became his personal Olympic training facility. The first time it happened, she awoke to a sound like a bowling ball being dropped on the floor, followed by the frantic rustling of her living room curtains. Heart pounding, she crept out of bed, imagining a burglar or a bear. Instead, she found Trouble hanging halfway up the curtains, swinging back and forth like a tiny gymnast, his eyes gleaming with delight. He then launched himself from the curtains to the back of the sofa, somersaulted onto the coffee table, sending a magazine flying, and finished with a flourish by scaling the tall bookshelf in the corner. She tried to Bobcat-proof the house, padding sharp corners and securing loose items, but it was a fool's errand. You couldn't proof a house against a creature that viewed gravity as a mere suggestion. At 2 in the morning, she'd be jolted awake by a tremendous thud as he practiced his dismount from the top of the refrigerator. Once, in the dead of night, he misjudged a leap from the wardrobe and landed squarely on her head as she slept. She woke up screaming, convinced the ceiling had caved in, only to find a very surprised-looking Bobcat untangling himself from her hair. Years later, the midnight gymnastics continued, only now with the weight and power of a full-grown athlete. The thuds were louder, the furniture trembled when he landed, and picture frames were perpetually askew. Yet, after each frantic, hour-long session of what Caroline called the midnight mayhem, he would do the same thing. He'd trot into the middle of the living room rug, flop dramatically onto his back, expose his spotted belly, and purr like a motorboat, the champion of a competition only he was competing in. It was hard to stay mad. How could you, when the source of the chaos was also the source of so much joy? In his first few weeks, however, that joy had seemed a world away. The tiny kitten she'd brought home was riddled with fear, a product of his traumatic start in life. He would tremble whenever she reached for him, hissing and shrinking away from her touch. She knew forcing contact would only deepen his distrust. Her heart ached for him, for the terror he felt in a world without his mother. One evening, desperate to connect, she had an idea. She took off one of her socks, a plain white one, and slipped it over her hand, making a simple puppet. She wiggled her fingers, making the sock dance on the floor a few feet away from his hiding spot under a chair. At first, he just watched, his blue eyes wary. Then, a tiny paw snaked out and batted at the sock. It was a hesitant, gentle tap. Caroline wiggled the sock again. He pounced, a clumsy, kittenish leap, and tussled with the sock puppet. For the first time, he was playing, not cowering. The sock puppet friend became their bridge. It was the one thing he didn't fear. Whenever he was anxious or scared, she would bring out a sock and wiggle it, and the tension would melt from his body. It was a language they both understood. Even as a powerful adult, the sight of a wiggling sock could reduce him to a playful kitten. His ears would perk, his eyes would lock on, and he would engage in a mock battle with the same fervor he'd had as an orphan. It was a beautiful, silly game, a constant reminder of how a simple act of gentle patience had mended his broken trust. Caroline was a dedicated yoga practitioner. Every morning, as the sun streamed through her windows, she would roll out her mat for an hour of stretching and meditation. Soon after he became mobile, Trouble decided this was a team sport. The moment the mat was unrolled, he would trot over, inspecting it as if for quality control. When she moved into downward dog, he would dutifully position himself underneath her, arching his own back in a perfect bobcat stretch. When she shifted into a warrior pose, he would sit beside her, swatting playfully at her outstretched hand. Balancing poses were his favorite. As she tried to hold a tree pose, he would weave through her legs, rubbing against her standing ankle and purring thunderously, making it nearly impossible to stay upright. What had once been her quiet time for reflection turned into Bobcat yoga, a chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly delightful routine. He'd sprawl across the mat, right where she needed to put her feet, effectively claiming it as his own. She'd laugh, nudging him gently. "Excuse me, sir. This is my Zen space." He would respond by rolling over and batting at her hair. Their shared practice was a daily dance, a reminder that peace and wildness could, in fact, share the same mat. Just as he had conquered her yoga mat, Trouble systematically conquered every piece of furniture in the house, with the couch being his ultimate prize. As a kitten, he would curl up in a tiny, warm ball beside her. But as he grew, so did his territory. Soon, he was taking up an entire cushion. By his first birthday, he had claimed the entire middle section. Caroline found herself relegated to the far edge, perched precariously on the armrest, while Trouble sprawled like a king, legs dangling over the side, tail flicking with contentment. Guests would stare, mouths agape. Is that a Bobcat watching The Price is Right? He prefers nature documentaries, Caroline would reply with a straight face. But the couch, his throne of comfort, became a place of profound connection one brutal winter. A nasty flu swept through the region, and it hit Caroline hard. For 3 days, she was bedridden, shivering with fever and too weak to do more than sip water. Trouble, the chaotic king of the house, transformed. He abandoned his nightly Olympics and his couch sprawling. Instead, he stayed glued to her side. He curled his large, warm body against her back, a living hot water bottle, and refused to leave. When she shivered, he pressed closer, his deep purr a constant soothing vibration. He would only leave to drink water or use his litter box, and would return within moments, nudging his head against her hand as if to check on her. In her feverish haze, Caroline understood. The wild heart that she had so carefully nurtured was not just wild, it was loyal. The animal who had trembled in fear at her touch was now her steadfast guardian. The chaos, the stolen socks, the midnight mayhem, it was all just the surface layer of a deep and unwavering bond. He wasn't just living in her house, he was part of her family. Caroline never forgot that Trouble was a wild animal. As a licensed rehabilitator, her ultimate goal was always to return animals to their natural habitat. But Trouble was a special case. Having been raised from such a young age, his instincts were sharp, but his lack of fear towards humans made him a poor candidate for a fully independent life in the wild. Still, she worked tirelessly to keep his wild spirit alive. She taught him to stalk toys, to listen to the calls of the birds outside, to recognize the scent of deer on the wind during their leashed walks in the woods surrounding her cabin. He had left his paw prints all over her home, deeper than any scratches on the furniture. He had stolen her socks, her boxes, her yoga mat, and her couch. But somewhere along the way, between the midnight crashes and the sock puppet games, the magnificent, chaotic Bobcat had also stolen her heart. One evening, as the sun set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting long shadows across the living room, Caroline sat on the floor, leaning against the couch. Trouble was sprawled on the cushions above her, one enormous paw resting gently on her shoulder. A well-loved Argyle sock lay on the rug nearby, a discarded trophy from an earlier game. His purr was a low, steady rumble, the sound of pure contentment. She looked around her little cabin, at the tilted picture frames, the faint claw marks on the doorframe, the cardboard box sitting in the corner. It wasn't the quiet, orderly sanctuary it used to be. It was a circus, a playground, a home filled with the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of a wild spirit. And Caroline realized, with a feeling of overwhelming gratitude, that she wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes, the most profound love doesn't bring peace and quiet. Sometimes, it brings a 25-pound bobcat who swings from the curtains and reminds you every single day what it truly means to be alive.